Hey guys, it's Christine, also known as IvyWinter. Thank you for joining me for another Disney Book Club video. I have finally finished The Queens of Animation and wanted to make my review video for you guys. Thank you to everyone who participated, who chose this book. Actually, this book was chosen by popular vote for the past month or so, and it was quite a read. It was another nonfiction novel that focused specifically on the women who worked at Walt Disney Studios back in the day. The women that were mostly featured within this novel were Grace Huntington, Retta Scott, Sylvia Holland, Bianca Majoli, and Mary Blair. And it was a fascinating read, if at times, sometimes a little bumpy. But I do think it was definitely an interesting peek into Walt Disney Studios at the time that these women were working there, and obviously dealing with the difficulty of the times in that, as a working woman, a lot of them weren't paid as well. A lot of them weren't viewed the same as some of their male counterparts. And so that is addressed in this book here and there. But beyond that, they talk about all the great things they did contribute, as well as a lot of the different types of animation and styles and the work that went into each of the productions, the struggles and the successes of a lot of the movies that now have become really popular that you might not realize some were complete bombs back in the day. And so it's kind of all encompassing, not just about these women and their stories, but it's also about the process of creating movies like Snow White, Cinderella, Bambi, Peter Pan, etc. It is a long book. I actually chose the audiobook this time instead of reading it. I just wanted to give the audiobook style a try. I listened to it while I gardened. I listened to it while I went for runs, just doing things around the house. And it was a very well done audiobook. I really liked the narrator, and overall it was super, super interesting. But even as an audiobook, it's quite long, hours and hours and hours long, and the book itself is something like 21 chapters or 20 chapters. It is not a short book by any means, and it is jam-packed with a lot of information, as we kind of find with a lot of the nonfiction books that we've been reading. They are really overwhelmingly packed with information, so that can make them a little bit of a slower read because there's a lot to take in. One of the things I didn't love too much, and I noticed this when listening, but I was also told by people reading the actual book that they experienced this as well, is that there was a lot of hopping around between different women's stories, and sometimes it was hard to follow exactly who the author was talking about at any given moment, because she would hop around all of them in every chapter. It wasn't like a chapter was dedicated to somebody. She really interweaved a lot of the paragraphs between multiple women and multiple artists, and so it gets a little bit confusing the way that she hops around, especially if you aren't paying super close attention. You might lose track of who she's talking about in any given moment. So wasn't always the most clear about where I was in the story. Another negative that I had was I did not love the opening. It's a bit of a crazy story that I think could be off-putting. I understand that she was pushing a little bit of a shock value with the way that women were treated, just in general in the workplace at that time. But the story is that one of them pitched an idea, it went over so poorly that they made fun of her. She cried and left and went to her office, and then apparently the male animators followed her to her office, broke down the door to literally keep making fun of what she did and tell her that, how dare she think that that was, a good idea and all that. It's a really crazy story. I assume it to be true. I'm not here to say that it wasn't true, but it's so negative, it's so jarring that you think, oh, this whole novel is just gonna be crapping on the men of Walt Disney Studios. And to be honest, that's not really the case in the rest of the novel. In fact, the author really talks a lot about the men who did support and work well with these women artists and animators. So it seems like when you start the book that it's going to be very one-sided in the view of what these women went through, but it actually does walk a very fair line. It's just a bit off-putting. Putting such a negative story right in the upfront was a bit jarring. One of the things that, like I said before, is kind of crazy to think about are like some of our beloved movies that just didn't do well Bambi did terribly. Apparently Alice in Wonderland was one of Walt's most hated animated films. They didn't even talk about it after it went out. Like it was like weird taboo to talk about it in the studios. It also got panned and the reviews were not great. And really of that era, two of the most successful movies that really kept them afloat was obviously Snow White, and then, you know, they put out these other movies that didn't do so well, and then Cinderella did quite well for them and made them a lot of money. But, you know, it does go through them having financial issues. It goes through the strike that happens. And it doesn't sugarcoat anything, and it's very honest about like some of these movies that, again, I just think it's so funny that we love a lot of these movies now and see them as classics, but at the time they bombed. They did really poorly, and there were moments where they thought Walt Disney Studios was going to close because it just wasn't performing the way that they needed it to. I think one of the artists that you focus the most on, and I think rightfully so because she's the most famous, I think, is Mary Blair. Mary Blair is well known for her very colorful art. She was known for bringing to life Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella. Also probably most famously known in the theme park world for It's a Small World. And just the kind of visuals and colors that we've come to know and love and associate with that ride. So she's really focused on a lot here. If that's not your jam, if you want to hear more about the other artists, it's there, they're in there. Grace is a fascinating one because I didn't realize that she was also a pilot. So they talk a lot about that, but you are gonna get a lot of Mary Blair. And you also learn that her husband, Lee, was not a nice guy. And I think you do start to, it delves more into her personal life and her close friendship with Walt and how her family life was kind of falling apart while she was doing what she was doing at Disney, which was interesting if sad. But it does, like I said, focus a lot on her. I feel like as she gets introduced a few chapters in, the book is like more of a focus on her. It feels like it focuses more heavily on her at this point. So, you know, make your judgment call if like that's interesting to you or not. One of the things that a lot of people didn't like was that there was a lot that went into how these movies were actually made, the animation styles, the actual inventions that Disney Studios used, and I found it fascinating, but some people I saw in like reviews that were like, well, I wanted to know more about the women's stories. I didn't want to get bogged down by the ins and outs of how Bambi was drawn, but I think that's part of their stories, right? I mean, they were involved in those productions. I think it's really interesting. But so there is that there. There's a lot of good meat behind how they created certain scenes, which actually made me want to go back and rewatch Bambi and rewatch Cinderella, knowing what I know now and how much work they put into certain scenes. When I was a kid growing up, I used to love Little April Showers. That was one of my favorite songs and my favorite scenes of Bambi, and there's a whole section in this book where they really talk about like how that came to be, both the animation and the music, and it gave me greater appreciation for it. So I think if you're looking for something like that, you're gonna like this book. Again, long read, so don't go into it lightly, but I think there's a lot of good information there. You know, it is not gonna pull any punches when it comes to how women were treated back then, and if that's something that, like, I don't know, you feel weird or uncomfortable about, maybe it's not the book for you, but I think it's worth reading because I think those things are important to remember and talk about and know about. And overall, I think it was a pretty good read. I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about when I first got into it, but I ended up really enjoying it by the end. So I'm gonna give this book, overall, I'm gonna give it an A-. Just some knocks for that first introductory chapter and a little bit with the pacing and following some of the artists, but I think it was really fascinating. Like I said, made me wanna go rewatch a lot of these classic movies. Also learning things about how they were gonna make a movie with Roald Dahl, who at the time wasn't even the famous author that he became. But that didn't pan out. So that's a really interesting story as well. Just little tidbits that I didn't personally know, that I felt like I really learned something. Like some of the nonfiction books, especially about the parks, because I am more well versed in that, I felt like, okay, I know these stories. This actually taught me something, and that's why I'm giving it an A-. I think it was well written, really captures these women's stories, but it also taught me a lot about these movies. So I would highly recommend it if you're into animation, if you want to learn about some of the women who didn't really get a lot of on-screen credit, but did a lot of amazing work, then The Queens of Animation is definitely your kind of book. As always, I'm going to be giving away the book. Now, I don't have my physical copy because I got the audio version, but that doesn't mean I can't give you one. So if you are interested in reading this book or you want to give it to someone else, very easy to enter this giveaway. It's the same rules every time. Just be a subscriber and then let me know in the comments below what interests you about this book, or why are you giving it to someone else? What do you think would interest them about this book? That's it. Subscribe, comment, you're in it. Randomly pick a winner in about a week, and then I will contact you. It's really, really important. I respond back to the comment, and you gotta check that. You gotta check YouTube, because if you don't see my response and you don't get me your address, I'm gonna have to pick a second winner. So if you're gonna enter, make sure in 1 week you check and you see if I responded to you and you were the lucky winner. If you did read the book as part of the book club, I would also like to know in the comments below, what did you think of it? What would your grade be for it? Did you like it? Did you not? What were your favorite parts, your least favorite parts? Love to know in the comments below. The next book is gonna be picked soon. We're actually going to do gather a bunch of people's different suggestions. If you want to give me your suggestion for the next book for the Disney Book Club, you can click on the link below. It's a survey. It'd be an open-ended answer. You can give me 1, 2, 3 suggestions. I'll start to see what some of the big suggestions are, and then we can poll everybody on which one that they want. So send me your suggestions through the survey link below, and then make sure you join the Discord. I'm gonna have that link below as well, because we'll likely do the voting there, but I will also make sure to put it out on social. So I'll put that poll on Twitter, on Facebook, in the community tab of YouTube as well. But if you want to be a part of that full conversation for book club and anything else, you should definitely join the Discord. If you like this video, then like it. If you like me, you should subscribe. I make videos every single week. Thanks again for watching, and as always, have a great rest of the day. Bye.